Hi, everyone. I'm Terry Brosmer, current president of the Accredited Gemologists Association. And on behalf of the AGA board and our education and webinar committee, I'd like to welcome our AGA members and guests to episode 2 in our series of AGA celebrity gemologist interviews. Before we get started, there's a couple things I'd like to mention. For those of you who are not familiar with AGA, the Accredited Gemologists Association is a nonprofit professional organization dedicated to providing a platform for gemological education and networking, and to upholding and promoting the highest professional ethics within the gemological community. If you are not yet a member, I urge you to support our mission by joining some of the world's brightest gemological minds as an AGA member. We offer membership levels for everyone, from students and hobbyists to practicing gemologists and research scientists. Hailing from around the world, our members share a passion for gemology. AGA members are happy to share their knowledge and experience no matter their position in the industry. AGA membership dues are purposefully affordable, with the goal of remaining attainable to everyone while the association continues to raise the bar when it comes to providing a platform for gemological education and the exchange of gemological information. So join the AGA community by sending in your application today. A membership application can be downloaded from the Handouts tab in your tool panel on the right side of your screen, or visit our website, accreditedgemologists.org. As a nonprofit association, we rely not only on membership dues, but also on the generosity of our sponsors. In 2022, essential support is provided by Art Samuels and EstateBuyers.com as our diamond sponsor. Beyond the financial support, Art shares his time and experience and is one of AGA's loudest cheerleaders. This year, we're incredibly fortunate to enjoy the support of these fine institutions as Emerald sponsors: Heritage Auctions, Stuller Settings, the American Society of Appraisers, the Canadian Gemological Association, Magilabs, Gem Shopping Network, and the Scottish Gemological Association. Please consider these businesses and organizations for your professional needs. We have Dr. Cheatham Lulay to thank for coming up with the celebrity gemologist interview format. It was her incredible insight to predict that many of us gemologist types would like to know more about the celebrities and change makers in our industry. Based on today's record registration, it is clear that Cheatham was right. John Koivula is truly a celebrity in our world, and we're eager to get better acquainted. He earned his GIA, GG, and F.G.A. in 1974, which coincidentally is the same year that the Accredited Gemologists Association was established. It was indeed a very good year. Richard Hughes and John Koivula are both AGA Bonanno Award recipients and have been friends and colleagues for decades. We can't wait to listen to and participate in their conversation. And now here's Cheatham.
Thank you, and hello to everybody. I am really excited about today. I feel privileged to be able to do this all together, and I cannot thank enough to John Koivula and Richard Hughes for joining us. We will be watching probably the most amazing two old friends chat on gemology, and I'd like to thank all our attendees and of course the board of AGA making this possible for all of us. Before we move on, I'd like to give you a little bit of housekeeping. You all have a control panel on your screens, and as attendees you are muted and no cameras are working. However, we encourage you to send questions either through questions or chat boxes, whichever one you have. Kate Donovan and I will be monitoring the questions and making sure that they are taken care of. If we don't have enough time after the interview to repeat your questions, they will be answered and sent back to all attendees. We're hoping that you could join us and ask any questions. One thing that I'd like to emphasize before we move on is that we have the most amazing two names here. I'm sure that all practicing gemologists are aware of their publications, their work. But in the meantime, from a personal point of view, I have to admit that both John and Richard are incredibly approachable people, just like many other gemologists that we work together. So I encourage everybody to ask whatever they need to ask and get in touch with them if necessary afterwards. Because this is the best way of networking and learning, and that's what we encourage as AGA. Thank you for all joining, and I'd like to pass it on to you, Richard and John. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheatham, and thank you, Terry, for the nice introduction. I'm pretty excited about this because John is somebody that I've respected since I got into gemology. I can remember the first time I saw this little booklet that the GIA published about gemstone inclusions, and the quality of the photography was at a standard I'd never seen before. And I had a chance to meet John for the first time in Brazil, and we've been friends ever since. And so it's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with John. And I think you'll all agree after the program is over that John is a really special guy. So let's get started. John, I understand that you have an interest in rocks and minerals that started really early. Can you just kind of lead us through how that happened?
Sure. The earliest memory I have is when I was 5 years old. And that was going out with my father and the whole family. We'd go across the Idaho Panhandle. We lived in a little town called Millwood, Washington, near the Idaho border. And we'd go across the Idaho Panhandle once a year and into Montana, where my father had a couple of mining claims. He was a mining engineer, and he had a couple of mining claims there. And in order to hold a claim, you have to do a certain amount of assessment each year and show your improvements. And so, while he improved his claims, I'd run around collecting rocks and minerals off the mine dump that was there and put them in the trunk of the car, the ones that I thought were special. And the ones that I was usually attracted to were the copper minerals, pretty much, because they were bright greens and blues, and they just had a lot going for them, I thought, as a 5-year-old. So I would collect these things and keep them in a special place in the back of the trunk so they wouldn't get banged around, although they were on the mine dump, so that really didn't matter. But I just enjoyed collecting these things. I thought they were little treasures. Another thing that we collected, which was interesting, or which I found interesting, was as a kid, I played marbles with the neighborhood kids. And one of the things that the mine had was a ball mill. And the ball mill had these steel balls inside of it that were like ball bearings. And so I would steal a few of these ball bearings from my dad and put them in the trunk along with the minerals. And then I'd use those as what they called steelies in playing marbles. So there was two events going on there at one time. One was my marble game and the other one was minerals. But I'd take the minerals back and keep the ones that I really liked. And then I'd load the wagon up, our little red wagon up, with the rest of them. And I'd go around and sell them door to door for a dime. And people would buy them. I think they probably felt sorry for the kid who had to sell rocks for a living, but I really loved doing it, and loved actually even back then sharing about where they'd come from and so forth with the people that were interested. So that's pretty much how I got my start. My father was a big influence on me because of his background in geology and mineralogy and so forth. And he always used to ask me what the definition of a mineral was all the time. And so I'd have to reel off the definition of a mineral, and he'd usually correct me a little bit on it to where I got it down to what I knew what I was saying was correct. So that was how I got started early on. And that rock collecting and mineral collecting habit just stayed with me up until the point when I was 12 years old. And when I was 12, I was I belonged to a rock club called the Rock Rollers in Spokane, Washington. and I was one of these junior members. There weren't very many of us. Most of the people were older, but they'd bring in little specimens for me and that kind of thing because I was the kid in the group. And so my rock collection was growing. But when we went to the Cascade Mountains and we went to a quartz collecting site, I was literally hanging off the edge of a cliff, and I found this quartz crystal. And the quartz crystal contained a pyrite crystal. And that's the first time I ever noticed inclusions. I ever took note of an inclusion, was this beautiful pyrite inside of the quartz. It looked almost magical or mythical to me. And that really got me going, and I enjoyed that specimen so much I kept it intact until it wasn't a good quartz crystal. It was broken. It had the termination was gone on it and so forth, but it had this magical pyrite crystal in it, and that got eventually made into a beautiful gemstone with the pyrite under the table. And it's still a specimen I have, and it's one that I treasure. So anyway, there's a slide presentation going around, and it says pyrite and quartz, the first one. And that's the very first inclusion right there, the first inclusion that I ever found. And that's what set me off on the path of studying inclusions. And I had rocks and minerals to trade. So I started trading for anything I could find that had inclusions in it. And so my collection began to grow and take a completely different direction, and I started doing that. But that started at 12 years of age, was my inclusion addiction, so to speak. And I just always have enjoyed rocks and minerals, and I attribute that to my father early on, taking us to the mining areas.
Well, here's a trick question. What's the definition of a mineral?
A trick question. What's the definition of a mineral? It's a chemical compound, basically, that has a fixed chemistry, essentially fixed. They can vary a little bit, but essentially a fixed chemistry, a fixed structure, and that's basically it. It's got a fixed structure and a fixed chemistry, and it's a naturally occurring compound. So that's what a mineral is.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure a lot of the students listening in will appreciate that. So, so you got your start collecting rocks and minerals at age 12. You found your first inclusion. You started buying specimens and trading specimens specifically for their inclusions. I hope I've got that right. And at some point, I guess you decided you got older, and you decided you wanted to further your education. And so can you tell us about that?
Sure. I was reading mineral books for a long time. I had them. My parents bought me Fred Poe's Field Guide to Rocks and Minerals, and I used that extensively as like a little mini Bible to me for identification of the rocks and the minerals that I was collecting. But I can't remember the question now. What was your question?
Well, yeah, so you eventually ended up studying in university, right?
Right. Oh yeah, well, I remember the question. I went about reading all the little books I could get, and even some papers on minerals that I could get a hold of, and it became clear to me that I was interested in basically two things. One was chemistry, and the other one was geology. And so that was what I studied when I went to university. They had a system which was a quarter system, and in order to graduate with a bachelor's degree, you had to have 180 credit hours of courses. Well, a major was 60 credit hours. There was a 60 credit block called General College Requirements, where you took things like philosophy and sociology and so forth. And then there was a 60 credit hour thing you could do whatever you wanted to with. You could take basket weaving or archery or whatever. whatever interested you. So I did the math on that quickly in my head, and I thought, well, I can get a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry for 60 hours. I could get a Bachelor of Science in Geology for 60 hours, and I could then do my general college requirements. So I could conceivably get out in 4 years with 2 degrees and 2 subjects that I liked. So basically, that's exactly what I did. I was taking a pretty heavy load, but I ended up with, when I graduated, with a little over 200 credit hours when I did my final graduation. And the two schools, the School of Geology and the School of Chemistry, never knew that I was doing the other one. They were completely in the dark about the fact that I was doing another major in another discipline. And I had minors in physics and math, so I had 2 separate minors, so they couldn't find any reason that they couldn't give me 2 diplomas. So that's what they did. So I actually went up twice to get my diplomas.
Wow. And what
So
university did you go to? Just
Eastern Washington
curiosity
State
sake.
University in a little town called Cheney, Washington.
Okay.
And I enjoyed it.
And so you obviously you were very interested in geology and in science, chemistry, physics, and I've always been blown away by your knowledge of those subjects. So I guess they taught you pretty well. So after you graduated, eventually you ended up working for the GIA. Can you kind of describe that path that took you to the GIA?
Well, it started early on, actually. I went into the mineralogical, geological, and chemistry fields. And when I was in high school, I won a science competition and got a national award for a new metal alloy that I made. And so that led me to the people that came. I did a talk. I had to do a speech and describe what this was as part of the award ceremony. And so I did this little lecture at the podium, and which was kind of nerve-wracking for me because I had never done anything like that before. But I did this little presentation, and at the end of the presentation, a man came up to me and he asked me, he says, "Do you have a summer job?" And I told him, "No, I don't really have anything lined up at this point." And he said, "Well, would you come and work for us for the summertime?" And he introduced himself and said he was from a company called Cominco American, which is a mining company. And so that just sounded like that was right up my field. And so I worked with them, and what we would do is we would, I even got to do some of this in the winter, but what we would do is go through the old mining journals, the ones from the 1800s and so forth, and they would describe old mines that they worked on and what the yield of the ore was and that kind of thing. Mostly they were looking for anything. They were looking for anything basically except for iron. But we would go through this old literature and find these mines, and then put out a field plan for the next coming field season to go and visit these mines. So I would literally get dropped off in the middle of nowhere practically. Sometimes we'd helicopter in, sometimes we would drive in, but we'd get out and we would make camp, and then we would go out and we would explore these mines. We'd have to hike to them and make sure that they were, when we got to a mine, we had to make sure that it was safe to go into. And so we took little amounts of dynamite and powder charges and so forth, and would loosen up and make the mine inside safe again to use, so that we wouldn't have big chunks of boulders and so forth coming down on our heads. We didn't want that kind of thing. But we would look at these mines, and again, it was a fruitful place to collect minerals. I remember one specific mine that we went to called the Black Pine Mine, and we crawled into a adit in the side of the hill, and there it pinched out, into just a small little opening. And when you look through the opening with the light and shined it in there, you'd see azurite crystals all over the walls, and they just glittered like these deep blue flashes coming off, and golden flashes coming off of the walls. And so we dug that out to where we could get inside. We went inside and just collected some specimens off the walls in there. But that was what I did in the summers then, for several summers beyond while I was going to school. And then what led me to gemology in the first place was I was starting to go out with Christy, my wife, and her mother had jewelry work done, and she had it done at a place called the Gem Shop. And she told me, she says, you ought to go in and meet this man who runs this, because he's got rocks on display and minerals on display. She didn't say minerals, she said rocks. She says rocks on display, and then there's jewelry, and he makes all the jewelry himself. So I thought that sounded kind of interesting. So I went and I met him, and his name was Leon AGA, and that was a real fortuitous event for me, meeting him, because he was a gemologist and also a master lapidary and a skilled jeweler. And he did all of his own. He collected Montana sapphires, cut the Montana sapphires, and sold them in rings. He collected star garnets from Idaho and sold those in jewelry and so forth. And he took me under his wing immediately. He did something that I still don't understand. I never understood. And I asked him about it. He said, I knew I could trust you. But he knew me for like 5 minutes, and he said, would you like something to drink? And I said, sure. I thought he had a little refrigerator with stuff in it. And he says, what would you like? And I told him, oh, I'll have a Coke. And so he said, okay. He says, I'll be back, guard the fort. And he took off up the stairs, because his work area was downstairs. He took off up the stairs out the store and went across the street to this little diner that was there, got us a couple of drinks, came back, and we sat there and chewed the fat and drank our drinks, and got to know each other and became friends over a short period of time. And he was the one who told me about gemology. I started showing him my inclusion specimens, and he said to me, he said, you realize that everything you're showing me, he says, is considered a gem material. And I said, no, I didn't really realize that. He said, yeah. He says that there's a couple of schools you might be interested in. He says one of them is the Gemological Association of Great Britain, and the other one is the Gemological Institute of America. And he said you can learn about the gem materials themselves in these courses, through these courses, and you end up with a diploma from that organization in gemology. And he had his diplomas. He showed me what they looked like, and he had them all up on the wall, sort of like decoration showing his expertise. But he took me under his wing and took the first specimen I ever had with an inclusion in it and turned it into I can't remember what it weighs now. It weighs like 15.71 carats. And it's a rock crystal with the big pyrite crystal underneath the table. And I have that today. And to me, it's a really treasured thing. But he was an expert lapidary. He holds the record. The record is still intact for the world's largest faceted stone, and it's in the Smithsonian. And that's the kind of thing he did. So he was an expert lapidary. He taught people how to facet and that kind of thing. He tried to teach me, but I just didn't. I wasn't a good student, he said, of lapidary. But what he did over the years is he cut more than 1,000 specimens for me. Some of them I insisted on paying him for. Others he didn't. He wouldn't take any money for it. He says he just enjoyed the work itself. He said it was a lot of fun to create these things out of the broken crystals and so forth. And we had a thing where we struggled with when we get a nice crystal, like a nice topaz crystal, and it had an inclusion in it. Do you cut that and make it into a gemstone, or do you keep the crystal, the nice crystal itself, with the inclusion in it? And I guess we decided early on that we'd keep the nice crystal. But when it was, but so I went and would spend time with him, and on his recommendation, I started to take I finally started to take the GIA's course and the British Association's course, and I took them simultaneously. So I was doing both of the courses at one time. And so I got the diplomas in 1974, I think it was. And at that point in time, I took a couple of years basically to figure out that I was not a jewelry or gem salesman, because I went to work for a company called Carroll's Fine Jewelry in Seattle, Washington, and was with them for a period of time. And that was enough to figure out I didn't want to do that kind of work. I wasn't really cut out for it, the salesmanship part. So in the meantime, the GIA, I decided, okay, the GIA had a placement booth or placement department where they would help graduated students find a job if they could. And so I sent them my resume, and they wrote me back immediately and said they'd like to hire me. And it was like, wow, that sounds really neat. So I gave up my career, or my career in jewelry sales, and Christy and I headed down in our car to Santa Monica, California, and we sort of adopted immediately into the I'd never seen, personally never seen a palm tree before, so we were like in a Jurassic Park movie or something, is the way I felt about it. It was really neat and interesting. And so I was supposed to report to work on, I think it was October 6th, just after my birthday. And so I went to the GIA when I was supposed to go there, and I went up to the reception desk and asked the receptionist, or told the receptionist, that I was there to work in the laboratory, and that this would be my first day. And she said, okay, just a second. And so she went to the door to the laboratory and buzzed herself in and went into the lab, and she came out, and then a few minutes later, Chuck Fryer came out. He was the director of the laboratory, and he became a really good friend as well. But he came out and he said, "And who are you?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, my name is John Koivula." And I said, "I'm supposed to be working here starting today." And he looked at me with the longest, funniest look, and he says, "Well, that's news to me." So I thought, uh-oh, we got a problem. I gave up the job and came all the way down to California to find out I'm not working here. But he said, "Well, take a seat over there." And so I went and took a seat where he told me to sit in the reception area. And so he went upstairs, obviously to see Mr. Liddicoat. And he came downstairs about 10 minutes later and he says, "Follow me." So we went into the lab and he says, "We got to find you a place to sit." And he sat me across from Karen Hurwitz, who became another really good friend. And that was my first day at GIA, and that's basically how I got there.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Okay, so I think we've already covered some of the material you got interested in gemology. Who were some of your influences? You've talked about Leon, of course, who I know was a lifelong friend of yours.
Right,
but who are some of the other people that influenced you?
People that influenced me were, I was influenced by my dad, first off. He got me started in the right direction. And then Leon, who I've already talked about. And the next person I would say that was an influence on me was Chuck Fryer. He was a big influence as far as gemology went, and as far as how to conduct yourself in a gemological laboratory and that type of thing, and the general process involved in doing gem identification. At that time, we didn't have any Raman instruments or FTIRs or anything like that. We just had the basic instruments that everybody sort of had, and we were able to do some fantastic work with those. And I sometimes wonder if some of that skill isn't being lost with the new machines. But and then Dr. Gübelin had been an influence on me just by his writings. I'd read his writings, and when I was sick up in Seattle, I got his book in 1976, Internal World of Gemstones, and that was a real, I just couldn't put that down. I read that from cover to cover, and so he was a definite influence on me. And I was already interested in inclusions, but he sort of opened a new door and a new area to it, because I didn't really understand the full breadth of inclusions as far as gemology went. I understood them in ore and in ore exploration and that type of thing, but I didn't really understand that his internal world just opened a door. It had so many different kinds of minerals in there that had inclusions, that ones that I'd never even looked at before. I'd never even studied apatite, for instance. I hadn't looked at apatite, and I saw some beautiful inclusions that he had in his book on apatite, and I also saw it as an inclusion, and that just really intrigued me. It was like having a gem in a gem. And so I was influenced by, let's see, my dad, Leon, Chuck Fryer, Dr. Gübelin, and I was influenced also, not so much gemologically as just work ethic wise. Mr. Liddicoat, he had the strongest work ethic. He would never let himself be idle. He was always doing something, always working toward the next project. And I'm sure you can understand that, Dick, with every project that you take on. But those were the people that I think influenced me the most. I had
okay.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, as an aside, I know that the GIA is kind of a suit and tie kind of place, and I understand that you lost the tie at one point. Can you kind of tell us how that came about?
Yeah, it was actually I got to GIA and I had probably 10 suits. I had a ton of suits and they all fit me fine, but I decided I was sick in bed and I was watching one of the sports shows on TV, and it showed this man, they were having the strongest man competition, and this guy was 5'11", which is what I was, but he weighed 200 pounds. And I weighed about 123. And I said to Christy, I said, I wonder what I'd look like at 200 pounds. And she said, don't be silly, you're not built that way. And I thought, well, okay, I'm going to find out what I look like at 200 pounds. So I started doing some weightlifting, and then I got into powerlifting. And I literally, all my suits didn't fit anymore. None of them fit, anything like that. And the last suit I had, we went to the conclave, the American Gem Society conclave in San Francisco. And I had this last suit that fit me on, and we did the GIA did the instrument room. We were volunteers, and we would make sure that the microscopes got to certain rooms, and the refractometers and spectroscopes and so forth. And we were the depository for the instruments. So we were all working away. Mr. Liddicoat was there helping us, and there was a couple other people, like 3 other people. And I was lucky because Christy was there. But what I did was I squatted down to put a spectroscope under the counter, and my suit blew up. The whole suit blew up. It just blew up. The seams down the legs and the thighs, the back of the coat, everything just blew up. It literally did. It sounded like a firecracker going off. And I'm sitting there feeling very ventilated, you know. And so that made it so that I wasn't being paid enough at the time to buy any new suits. They just weren't in the budget. So I started wearing different outfits in. I started wearing just polo shirts with jeans, and they let me do it. They didn't say anything to me about it. They just let me do it, and I didn't have any tie on. And Chuck mentioned at one time about the tie and being gone and stuff, and I said, well, I really don't meet with the public, so you know, it's not. I don't think it's a real problem. But they let that go for a while. I eventually got a couple new suits, but that was how I lost the tie. And the tie
Okay,
was gone.
you mentioned to me one time about how you were setting up a stone in the microscope, and you had taken a long time to get it.
Tie. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, no, that takes a long time. Anybody that does the photomicrographs, Billy will tell you it takes a while to set up the gemstone and get it just the way you want it for the picture. And when you have a tie on, it would periodically go in and hit it. So that's another reason I didn't have the tie anymore. I was getting tired of the shots being ruined by the necktie that was there.
okay. All right. I think you probably published a few bazillion papers and books on gemology, and you told me something that a professor of yours had taught you years before. I think it was when you were in university, about publishing. You want to just talk about that, the importance of publishing?
Yeah, a professor that was a physics professor, he basically told me after I'd finished the first course in a series of courses that I was going to take in physics. And he told me, he says, you know, he says, I think you're going to end up in the sciences somewhere. And he said, you're have to learn. He said, this is important. And a lot of them never get this, never understand it. But if you learn something in science, you'd have the obligation to write it down so others can benefit from it. And so he was a guy that I respected. And so he, I guess he was an influencer too, because of him, I started taking notes on all the experiments and things that I was doing, just taking my own notes on them. And that led to, when I went to GIA, I started writing right away. I started writing lab notes for Gems and Gemology in the section called the lab notes. And that was the man who told me that was the one who influenced me to write things down. And I found that I liked doing that. I liked educating people and showing them new things. It's like when I first went to gemology, everybody thought that the only place you found three-phase inclusions was in Colombian emeralds. They didn't know that a three-phase inclusion was a product of the environment that the stone went in, and there was a lot of fluid inclusions that had three phases in them, and a lot of different gem materials like topaz and tourmaline and danburite, and I mean, you could go on with the whole litany of these things, and they all had three-phase inclusions in there, inside of them. And so that was something that I introduced at GIA, was the fact that it wasn't just emeralds. Emeralds had a specific look to them. The Colombian emeralds had a specific look to them, but they weren't the only three-phase inclusions found in gem materials. A lot of gem materials have them.
Okay. You have written the Photoatlas series along with so many others. and you've described how you came to start writing. And of course, your articles and your books are filled with such lovely photomicrographs. And what, in your opinion, what makes a great photomicrograph?
Well, the first thing that makes a great photomicrograph is a person that's willing to take the time to set the image the way they know it can be. They've looked at it in their microscope and they know the potential, the possibility, and then not take any short steps, but do the work required to set the thing up. But you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. And so if you have an ugly inclusion, you're not going to be able to get a good photograph out of it. It's going to be an ugly photograph. So it's the image itself, the material itself, the inclusion itself that you're shooting, and then the patience and to get it set up, provided you have the right equipment. Like there's certain things you definitely need, and one of them is, I think, is a fiber optic illuminator. I think that that's very important to have as an instrument for photomicrography, because it's a controllable source of light that you can move all over the place, and not because it's not attached to the microscope itself, you can move it without moving the stone. So that your subject can stay in a certain position and you can play with the light and see what it does in different directions. And that's the thing.
I think you really pioneered that type of lighting. Can you tell us how did, I don't think you just woke up one morning and said, I need a fiber optic light.
No.
How did that happen?
Well, that happened because I liked doing I liked inclusions, and I also liked small mineral specimens, what they called micromounts. And a micromount is mounted in a black box on a little cork, usually set in there, and then the whole thing is painted black, and then the specimen is down inside of that black box on that little cork end. And that's called a micromount. And in order to get light in there, in order to photograph it, you have to really be able to dump light in there and down into that little black house that the thing is in. So I remembered seeing fiber optic system that I thought was interesting. I didn't necessarily think of it for gemology, but I thought it was interesting that these doctors that were using microscopes to operate in the operating room, in the operating theater, they were using microscopes, and they had these fiber optic lights coming in from the sides, illuminating their subject that they were working on. And I thought that was really interesting. And then I started thinking about that in relationship to micromounts, because I was having a hard time getting enough light in there on my micromounts to make them look any good, and it was uncontrolled lighting, and it just wasn't good. So I thought, well, gee, maybe one of these would work. So I got a Dolan Jenner unit. I did some research and found out that Dolan Jenner was the one that made the best fiber optic lights. They were used in the medical field primarily. So I bought a Dolan Jenner light with these little things called light wands, and I proceeded to start playing around with my micromounts, and those micromounts came to life. I was able to get the light down inside with the fiber optic light, and they just came to life. You could just see so much detail. So I thought, well, this is really working. I wonder what it'll do on a gemstone. So I set up a couple of gemstones, and first I just played with crystals on the ground, on the desk, just a crystal. And I'd put the light up to it and see what happened on the inside, and the inside would illuminate and things would appear that I didn't see before. So I decided this is something to do on the microscope. So I put it on the microscope and I started playing around, and sure enough, I got thin films of beautiful colors that I hadn't seen before, and it brought detail to the included crystals and so forth that were in there. And I just really became enthralled with using it. But it wasn't something that they had at GIA when I went there. They had only one fiber optic light in the whole lab, and that was sitting on the back on a heavyweight table that also had a scale on it for weighing stones. It was our weight scale. And this light was sitting there, and I couldn't figure out why a fiber optic light's sitting there and next to the scale and nobody's using it. I thought this is a valuable tool. So without asking permission, over a lunch break, I just went and I got the fiber optic light and I started playing with it. I took it to back to my desk and plugged it in and was just messing around with stones that I was working on. And I was heavily involved looking at this one stone, and Chuck Fryer all of a sudden tapped me on the shoulder and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I was looking at the stone with this fiber optic light." He says, "We don't use that light unless a stone's dropped." He said, "We use it to search for stones." And so I thought, okay, well, that's what they're going to do. You know, that's what it is. So I put it back. And so then some time went by, and then we got a stone in a ruby. It was a ruby, and nobody could find anything in it. I hadn't seen it yet, but nobody could find anything in it. It passed between Chuck and Karen. Karen was senior, just below Chuck, and it passed between them and a couple other people that were senior in the lab, and I hadn't seen it yet. And so Chuck finally brought the stone over to me and he handed it to me and he says, "Here, take a look at this." He says, "This is a flawless stone. We can't decide whether it's natural or synthetic." And he said, "Maybe you can find something in it." And so I took the stone, and once again, over my lunch break, I went and got the fiber optic light because I knew what it did with particles, small particles, how it makes them stand out. And so I got the fiber optic light again. I knew I was taking a risk, but I got it and I put it next to, I went around the stone, I put it next to the stone in one direction, and the thing just lit up with little tiny flux droplets that were very directional in their visibility. And it was a Kashan synthetic ruby. I'd seen this before, and this was a Kashan synthetic ruby, that the stuff they call rain in the Kashans. And so I was just really thrilled. I'd found not only one thing, I'd found a million of them, all in the same direction. And you take the light away and they disappear, and you put it back and they were there and it disappeared there. And so I just left it in that position. And so Chuck came back from lunch and I told him, I said, "I want to show you that." I said, "I know what that stone is. It's a Kashan synthetic ruby." And he says, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, you left it with me." And I said, "I found the rain in it." I said, the stuff that they call rain, the little flux droplets. And I said, "It's just full of them." And he said, "Let me see this." And so he went over and I said, "Well, you got to use the fiber optic light, Chuck." I said, "You can't." Chuck had us always call him Chuck. He didn't like Charles. But I said, "You got to use the fiber optic light, Chuck. You can't just look at it dark field." I said, "But do that first." I said, "Look at it just through the microscope like that, the way it's set up." And so he looked at it dark field, and I said, "Now just put that down next to the edge, the end of the stone. Just put that down. Don't touch it. Just bring it in there." And so he brought it in there and he says, "Holy smokes." He said, "We're going to have to get some of these fiber optic lights for the lab." And that's what we did. But a fiber optic light in gemology first appeared in an article that I did. I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was one of the very early articles on, it was like in 1980 or 81. It appeared in Gems and Gemology, a picture of my Dolan Jenner fiber optic light. And,
I remember that. And we looked at that article. We said, "What's that? We got to get one of those things." Yeah. I remember at one time you told me that you had some vision problems. And
yes.
Can you tell us about that and maybe how that has impacted your photomicrography?
Well, everybody has two eyes pretty much. And the left eye was my strong eye. It was the dominant eye. and the right eye was subservient to it. But one day, and there's no reason for it, I don't know what happened. To this day, nobody knows what happened. But about 35 years ago or 40 years ago, something like that, 35 years ago, I would say now, Christy and I were driving across out in the Mojave Desert down a road, and all of a sudden I noticed that everything on this side of my vision was, everything on this side was okay, normal colors, but everything on this side was bright reddish pink. And I thought, what the heck is that? And so I looked, and it became okay again, but over here was bright reddish pink. And I knew that now it was moving, whenever I moved my head, the color would show there, the red pink color. So I finally just covered up this eye, and everything was hot pink red, and my eye was red inside. And I thought, what in the devil's happened? I didn't know what had happened. There was nothing we could do about it at that time. So right away, we were on a trip. I think we were going to Mammoth Lakes or something, but I'm not sure where we were going. But anyway, so when I got back, I went to the doctor, and I got diagnosed with what's called central serous retinopathy. And it's when the artery in the eye, the small artery in the eye, blows out, it'll flood it does it with some force, and this one damaged the optic nerve, so that's permanently damaged. So the center of my vision is completely gone in this eye now. I don't have, and that was my strong eye, my left eye. I don't have any central vision, just a little bit of peripheral vision in it. And that ruined photomicrography, because I was sitting there using this eye to set up the shots and that kind of thing in the microscope, because I was using a trinocular head, and it was just the one eyepiece that you use to take the picture. And so I had to start using this eye. And now since that time, this eye's dead, went out just like a light bulb, and this eye is stronger than it's ever been. So I was lucky that way. This eye adapted and became the strong eye, took over. And so, but it was scary for a while, because I was waiting for the other one to do the same thing, I was just, something was wrong, and I was just waiting to go blind is what it amounted to for about a year. I was just waiting, which day am I gonna, and I'd sometimes go like this to see if I could see any pink when I was looking at blue or something like that. So that went out, and that was a kind of a frightening thing. But now I've had a career, and it's not such a worry to me anymore.
Actually, I think it is an advantage in a certain way, because when we look through a microscope, we see everything in stereoscopic view, and we get the depth perception. But when you're making a photograph is a two-dimensional thing. And so I've often found it useful to block my vision in one eye when I'm shooting a photomicrograph, because if it looks good with one eye, then I know it will look good, as a photograph.
Right.
And I know B.W. Anderson, the famous British gemologist, he was colorblind. And as a result of his colorblindness, he started using the spectroscope. And that's how he developed the spectroscope as a way of gem identification. And so I think it's actually probably improved your photography.
Maybe
just
it
the
has.
fact that you're only looking with one eye.
Yeah, it might actually be the case. You make sense in what you say, but I still would rather have my two eyes back and my one eye back.
Yeah. This is kind of a nice lead into, what you did with the fiber optic light source. A lot of people might not be aware, but you were involved with the MacGyver TV show.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that a little bit? I'm sorry, somebody is knocking on my door. Excuse me. You go ahead.
Okay.
You talk.
Okay. let's see, how did I get involved with the MacGyver television series? Well, our daughter, Erica, she was just a little toddler basically, and we had her at preschool, and she was friends with this one little girl, and they were playing together, and Erica was backing up, and she was getting near a mud puddle, and she was backing up. And so I just told her, I said, Erica, watch out for the mud puddle behind you. And she turned around and looked at it and saw it, and then saw it. And then I was just sitting there, and this man says, "You're Erica's dad?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's our little girl." He said, "Yeah, my name's Lee Zlotoff." And I said, "Oh," I said, "Hi, how are you?" And I introduced myself, and he introduced himself, and we got to talking a little bit. And I found out that he was involved in a television show called Remington Steele. And I didn't watch the show, so I couldn't really relate to it that much. But I just acknowledged the fact that he did that kind of work. And I told him what I did and what my background was. And so that was it. Basically, the little luncheon broke up and everybody went their own way. And so like a month later, I got a phone call from a studio, and they wanted to know if I could make a ultralight glider that could be smuggled into the United States by the Bulgarian Olympic team. And I said, sure. I said, that sounds like a fun thing to do. So I made something up that involved the whippiness of for the skeleton, the whippiness of the pole vaulters' poles, and the zipper coats that they were wearing could be zipped together to make a shell and all that kind of thing. And I made a glider. It probably wouldn't have, I'm sure it would not have worked, but it made a plausible glider. And I got some calls from people telling me thank you, from several people, actually. I think it was about 4 or 5 people called and telling me thank you, and including this Lee Zlotoff. And that was it. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't ask, how much do I get paid, or, any of this kind of stuff. I just sort of did it as a brain exercise. And that was it. And then about 1.5 years later, I get a phone call from this Lee Zlotoff, and he sits there and says, I've been given a competition to write a pilot for a television show. Would you be interested in working with me on this? He says, I don't know anything about science. And he said, this is supposed to be science-based. And I said, okay. I said, let's meet for lunch. So we met for lunch, and it turned out that I guess it was like 12 writers were all given a one-sentence thing a one-sentence idea that they were supposed to make a script around. And the one-sentence idea was to make a character using the latest technical devices, i.e. laser watches, gets in and out of tight situations and foils the bad guys. And that was all that you had to go on to make a series. That was the starting point. So I said to him, the first thing you don't want to do with the character, I said, is to make all the ultimate lasers built inside of watches and all this kind of stuff. Because I said, you got 11 other people out there that are going to be turning in lasers and watches. And I said, we want to make this guy fly by the seat of his pants and make things up as he goes along. And that was my idea, to do that. And I said, so he just does miracles basically out of things around him, and gets involved in the whatever the plot is. He gets involved as he goes along and gets more involved. It's like in the first episode I made it, there was a general that had a very expensive Steiner binoculars around his neck, and he asked to see the binoculars, and then he broke them open to get a prism out. and he got the prism out, and he wanted to take the prism so he could, because he had to go through a laser chamber in order to get to an object that he needed. And so I made him get the prism out so that he could catch one of the lasers in the prism and guide it around and use it to annihilate the other lasers. And so that's what he did, you know, was just broke up the binoculars to get the prism out. And the general was kind of shocked at that. So I worked on the series for 7 years, I think it was, doing what they called the MacGyverisms on the show. They got to call it, that's what they called the things, the little tricks and stuff that he did was MacGyverisms. And one of the things is, as long as we're talking about this here, I want to straighten out something that is involved with MacGyver. They're now calling MacGyver, saying his name was Angus. It never was Angus. His name was actually Stacy, and that's the truth.
Okay.
That goes all the way back to the beginning. So anyway, it was Stacy MacGyver. But yeah, I did that.
Well, you've always had that knack for taking simple things and turning them into tools. And I know many of the things that we use with gemology are things that you developed. The little polariscope that you put in the microscope, and then you've made all kinds of little things like MacGyverisms for gemology, and we're all better for it. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
We've been doing this for an hour now, and I know that there are a lot of people who want to ask questions. So I'll try to wrap up the question and answer session part of this, and then we'll open the field to questions from the audience. But I know there are a lot of young gemologists who are listening in, and is there any advice that you could give them?
If gemology is what you really have a passion for, and you love doing it, by all means stick with it. It's an absolutely fantastic career, and you are able to do something you love to do. It's like getting paid to do your hobby every day. So that's what I would say. If you know in your heart, if you really enjoy it, you really love it, and it's just something that hits your fancy and you want to run with it, then by all means go ahead and do that. Learn everything you can and go on from there. Read, yes. Read the books that Dick produces, like the new Jade book. See, I'm giving it a plug. Doesn't need any, but it's fantastic. But anyway, that's my advice to them, is to do something. Maybe it isn't gemology. To young people, I always say, do something that you love to do. Find a way of doing that, and you never work a day in your life.
Yeah, that's the truth. I know that you have, I have this little thing on my shirt here. It's a horse with a polo player on it. I don't ride horses. I don't play polo. What's on your shirt there?
It's a bunny rabbit. It's a little rabbit.
I know that.
With skull and crossbones rabbit.
You have a passion for rabbits. Why don't you tell us about that?
I really don't remember. It's a long ago passion. I started when I was a little kid. I used to see these rabbits in our neighborhood in Millwood in hutches and stuff, and I'd go in and I'd feed them stuff. I'd feed them grass or whatever I could find to feed them. And it was just something that happened over the years. I called Christy, I said she had a bunny nose because she wiggled her nose. And it was just something that we both have enjoyed. And we have two little rabbits out in the living room right now, sitting there enjoying the day. And it's just, I don't know, they just are clever little animals that are survivors, and I just find them very enjoyable.
I always refer to your house as the Bunny Ranch. Anyway,
Yeah.
I think we should probably, first of all, I want to let people know that you're going to be speaking live in Springfield, Massachusetts at the Springfield Gem and Mineral Show. And that's coming up shortly. What is the date of that? Do you know the date? And I think that Cheatham will publish the link to that in the chat. But
I think it's August 13th.
okay, and you're speaking about inclusions in quartz, right?
Correct, because that's the theme of the show. We have one of the people has a case, if anybody is able to go to the Springfield show, 52 cases of quartz materials. So it's going to be a real educational thing.
Great. Okay. Do you have anything else you want to get off your chest? Is there anything particular you'd like to say before we open up for questions?
Well, I want to thank you for doing what you've done here this morning, taking your time to do it. Yeah. And again, I think
pleasure is all mine.
And again, I want to say that the books that you write on corundum and on jade now are Bibles to anybody that cares to take and read them. They are definitely very readable and very, very educational. So you're to be commended on that.
Well, thanks, John, and the check is in the mail.
You got it.
Okay. So I think maybe now it's time for Cheatham to throw some questions at you that the viewers have been interested in.
Let's see if I can answer them.
That I have to cut this. It's just, I could carry on listening to you both for the next 3 hours with no problem. I'm sure the audience is sharing the exact same feeling, but we have a lot of questions. But I'm going to be very selfish and ask my major question that I want to ask to all major names in gemology. John, you've been in this profession for such a long time, and I've always wondered, people like you, what do you think that should be most important thing in future of gemology? What do you want to see in future of gemology?
Well, I don't want gemology to turn into a science that people don't connect with the stones anymore. They just go and put them on an FTIR, Raman, or something like that, and they're using $250,000 instruments to answer $1 questions. I want to see gemology still remain not in the dark ages, certainly, but where we are able to use our basic gem testing instruments and be very powerful with them. I don't think that you should be allowed to work with the Raman instrument or with any other kind of advanced testing unless you've also mastered the basic instruments. And I'm afraid that some people are going directly to these instruments for answers and not connecting themselves to the stones. But things like a microscope, for instance, a microscope connects us to the micro world, and in gems and minerals, the small inclusions and things like that, the same way that a telescope connects us to the outer reaches of space and the universe. So I'd say continue to use your instruments and become very, very skilled with those. And if you get the opportunity to use a Raman instrument or a FTIR or a LAICPMS or any of these instruments with these long acronym names, go ahead and by all means do it. Take advantage of learning how to do that, but it shouldn't take the place of your basic gemological knowledge.
Thank you.
I remember, John, you said something once about the microscope, and you said it's different from every other instrument. Yes. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Sure, it's different from every other instrument because there's no answers. A refractometer will give you a series of a couple of numbers that you can look up in a book, A spectroscope gives you specific wavelengths, which are related to numbers on a scale. A microscope, there's no answers in there. You sit there and you look through a microscope, and the only answers are what's already in your brain, how you've been trained, and what you've seen and personally experienced. And so when you use the microscope, you only get out of it what your knowledge is in your brain. You spot an apatite crystal in a spinel. You know what that is because you've seen pictures of it before, and you've actually been exposed to apatite crystals and spinels, so you know that particular inclusion. But if you've never seen an apatite crystal in a spinel, it probably look like a hot dog to you. And you won't have a clue what it is or even what it means. It's rounded looking, so maybe it means it's synthetic. You don't know because you've never been exposed to it. So it's exposure. The microscope is an instrument of science and knowledge, and it's the most universally recognized instrument of science and knowledge, more so than anything else. That's why whenever you see on a TV show that has to do with science or anything like that, they always have a microscope in the background. A microscope is always there just to let them know that there's science going on here. And so that's what I would say, is that it's an instrument of science and knowledge that connects us to the natural side of things in a way that we can't get in any other way of doing it.
Thank you. I think I will take this opportunity, and I really don't want this to go away, but can you tell us about johnkoivulaite?
Oh, sure. I was really pleased with that. It was very nice of them to do that. They've named a new mineral after me. It comes from, and I'm glad it comes from Burma. It comes from from Myanmar, and it is it's a member of the beryl group. So it's related to things like photoatlasite, beryl itself, and it's probably, there's only one specimen known, actually two specimens known, because the original specimen was broken in half. So there's two specimens of it out there, but that's all there is right now. It's just two, and the one and where the one specimen, the type specimen is at the GIA and the in the GIA's gem collection. It'll be archived there. It has to be archived in a museum. So that's where it's being archived right now.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'd like to move on to audience questions, and I'm not going to be able to ask them all, but this one is from Gary Roskin. He's asking, I know John was surprised to find a blue kyanite crystal in a diamond. What other gem materials has John found inside another gem that he was surprised to find?
I found sapphirine in ruby. Sapphirine isn't sapphire, it's a completely different mineral, but I found sapphirine in ruby from Thailand, and also sapphirine in ruby from Kenya. So those two were a surprise to me. Mineralogical in a, well, it's right on the tip of my tongue, in a tsavorite, and garnet, and those are probably the strangest things that I've found.
Okay, thank you. I have other questions, but some of them were actually answered during your chat. And actually, Connie Forsberg asked about your shirt as well. So I think he knows where this was going. Okay, let me see. We have Catherine Ames asking, I have so many books by both of these gentlemen. Do they have any other gemology book recommendations?
Boy, Dick would have thousands of recommendations, I'm sure. Yeah, I like Robert Webster's Gems, Their Sources, Description, and Identification. I think that that's a kind of a Bible in the industry. And I like Internal World of Gemstones as well by Edward Gübelin. And there's a whole series of books that were put out by Johnson Kankas. He, like Emeralds and Other Beryls and Gemstones of North America and so forth, all of those are worth reading. They have such a wealth of knowledge in them. They're really special books as well.
How about you?
Dick, do you have any recommendations?
Well, my first gemology book was Richard Liddicoat's Handbook of Gem Identification. And I find that to be a magnificent book for people who want to learn basic gemology. So I love that. Joel Aram's Color Encyclopedia is a terrific book. As you said, Johnson Kankas's works. His book on mineralogy, if you want to learn the basics of mineralogy, is excellent. Yeah. So there's so many. There's so many.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. One more question from Jack Lowell. He's asking, what single-faceted gemstone had the most beautiful inclusion, either macro or micro, in your experience, and what was it?
What?
Faceted gemstone, the most beautiful inclusion you saw. He's asking, what was your most favorite one?
Most beautiful inclusion I've seen. It's probably actually a secondary fluid inclusion thin film in a topaz. I had a little topaz from Mexico, and it had this secondary thin film in it that you could play with for hours, and it was really something special. I also like the purity of diamonds when they have colored inclusions in them, like diopside in diamonds, a chromium diopside, or a pyrope garnet, that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's so many, I just need to filter. Okay, Andrew Lampert is asking, please explain the black box photo technique in more detail. Thank you.
Black box photo technique?
Yes, I'm not sure what it means, but I don't know if you know it, or is he
I'm
referring
not sure what
to
she means by that. I talked about the little black boxes that the
micromounts were coming.
we're in. I don't know if that's what she means or not, but the black box photo technique in that case is just getting the fiber optic lights down into the black box to illuminate and then playing with them gradually to get the crystal illuminated the way you want it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure of another black box photo technique.
Andrew, I believe that's referring to the same point I thought, and those boxes are tiny little boxes because they're micro minerals. So
right.
That's just to eliminate the small specimen. That's what I know, and that's what you're referring to, John, right? Okay.
Have you heard of anything called a black box, Dick? Black box photo?
That's a new one for me.
Okay.
I mean, of course, we're always hoping for that. You just put the gem in the black box and then push a button and it spits out the answer, right?
That would be terrible.
And then it would be a lot of business.
Yeah, no. There is no black box for gemology.
No.
I know you touched on that very briefly at the end of your conversation, but we have Mohamed Jahanza asking, what is the most important tool beside microscope and analytical equipments nowadays?
Most important tool besides the microscope? I think probably in addition to the microscope, it would be your brain, how well educated you are, and what you do. Dick and I have exchanges where we put our heads together It's like an air gap, almost like an air gap transfer of information between computers. But no, I think that probably the basic instrument for gemologists is the refractometer after the microscope. Microscope's first and then the refractometer, I think. That's my choice.
The very first lecture I heard you given, it was in GIA London many years ago, and I think somebody asked the same question, and you said the most important instrument a one gemologist can have is your eyes. And it is so true. You really need to know how to look at a gemstone, and I took that by heart. It was one of the best advices I got in gemology.
Yeah, you got to protect your eyes, believe me.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Okay, I will ask one more. There are many, but actually, this question is from me before I move on to the last one. You have a science background and you're an amazing scientist. We all know that. But if you didn't become a gemologist, what do you think you could be?
I would have either been a field geologist or a pediatrician. One of the two, and I'm not sure which one. I know they're very diverse areas, but I love little kids, so a pediatrician would have been something that I would probably have looked at, and also field geology. It gets you out. I'm telling my grandson now, who's taking a geology course at school, I'm telling him that gemology or geology has such a wonderful array of things that you do when you have a career in geology. It takes you out into the woods and into the mountains, so you get away from the city. It allows you to do library research in the winter time, and you get to fly drones. You get to use explosives. There's all sorts of things that you get to do as a geologist that you normal people don't get to do. And so that would be that's probably what I would have ended up with. But I did toy with the idea of a pediatrician at one time. Yeah. So.
Okay. All right. The last question. This is coming from Kenan Young, and he's asking, with the automation of GIA grading, do you, Mr. Koivula, find this to be a bad thing? Does it contribute to the disconnect of gems and gemologists that you've been talking about in this lecture?
Well, I have to say that I'm not really involved with the grading of diamonds at all at GIA. I know that they're working to automate certain aspects of it, which I think personally, I think it's a good thing if you can automate certain areas of it, as long as you're checking on yourself. In other words, you still let the gemologists take a look at something and make sure that a machine that's doing color grading, for instance, isn't off making mistakes. Because if you don't know, if your gemologists don't know how to properly color grade a stone, they're not going to notice if the machine is making errors. So you need the trained gemologists in the diamond grading field to be able to grade diamonds properly in order to automate with success. So I don't think that one really affects the other one. I think that it will just streamline. There are so many diamonds to grade. It'll just streamline the diamond grading process, and without sacrificing accuracy if it's done that way. So I don't see a threat to the well-prepared gemologist at all.
Thank you. Sadly, we have to end this. I just don't want to do it.
Can I make one more Can I make one more comment real quick? Because, you know, John has written this magnificent series, the Photoatlas series. I don't know how many copies are left, but anyone who has an interest in gemology, get them while you can, because I don't know if they'll reprint them in the future or not.
Yeah, we don't know.
So they're worth every penny. And so for any gemologist to call yourself a gemologist, you have to have those books.
Thank you, Dick.
I agree. Before we close this, I want to remind everybody watching this on the chat panel, Kate posted plethora of links. Everything that we talked about that can be found on internet, Kate posted it there, so take advantage of that. We have so many thank yous and appreciation for this, and I cannot thank you enough to both of you. So I appreciate this. I appreciate this generosity coming from both of you, sharing all this information and reaching out to people that who are interested in the subject. So thank you very much again, and thank you for attending today. And I'd like to pass it on to Terry for the closure. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, John and Dick, for a wonderfully entertaining interview. I'm sure that the audience enjoyed it and found your personal stories as inspiring as I did. Thank you, Cheatham and Kate, for doing all the logistics to make this possible. And most of all, thank you everyone for sharing part of your day with us today. As you all know, this is being recorded and you will all receive a link to the recording so you can go back and review it at your leisure. And you will find a lot of other wonderful AGA recorded educational presentations in our digital library while you're there. If you're not yet an AGA member, please consider joining the community and supporting the future of gemology by becoming an AGA member. We hope to see you all in person at our next in-person event, the AGA Tucson Conference, February 1st, 2023. Mark your calendars. Until then, to keep up on all things AGA, be sure to connect with us on social media, where Kate's very active for AGA on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Thanks again, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.